Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I will be reviewing the brand new and already very popular WIESEL 1A1 tow, which is the first ATGM only vehicle inside World of Tanks console, and it is a premium Era 3 tank destroyer for the Western Alliance. It's a German tank destroyer, and as you can see, it is a very compact, very small vehicle. It's extremely mobile, very sneaky, and it has devastating ATGMs. It does have some balancing figures, but it is a bit of a nuisance on the battlefield already. It's kind of broken the matchmaker for the first week, but it is wise to give it a bit of time for it all to settle down and see where it holds up in about a month's time, say. And if it's like the Armadillo was for Era 2 when it's introduced and too powerful, it will be nerfed, I hope, but we'll see where it holds up. In today's video, I'm going to be going over all of the stats of the WIESEL over here on Excel. We're going to be comparing to the CATTB Thumper, which is the tank destroyer you can get with the Valiant season. And we're also going to be comparing to the Tech Tree Type 89, so to other Era 3 tank destroyers. Then I'll show you how the ATGMs hold up of the WIESEL compared to all ATGMs in Era 3. And then we're going to have a look at how the concealment rating holds up of the WIESEL compared to all tank destroyers and light tanks in Era 3 to give you a nice overview of where this tank destroyer holds up. Here's my Excel spreadsheet with the stats of the WIESEL on the left. Green's the best stat, red is the worst, and orange is somewhere in between. And a little bit later on, I'll talk about my equipment and commander setup and how it affects the stats of the WIESEL. And these are here highlighted in yellow. Then we're going to get stuck into full gameplays, and I've got a nice ammo rack montage for you at the end to show you how devastating these ATGMs are. But if we skip back just for a moment, let's have a look at the WIESEL on the tank that they have put up on the World of Tanks console website. It's very compact, as you can see. It has the ATGM launcher on top. It doesn't have any armour whatsoever. I believe the thickest part of the actual hull of this vehicle is like 5mm, which is absolutely terrible. Something like 5 or 7mm. So you will be penned by HE off every single vehicle you come across in Era 3, and you're so small that if you get rammed, you lose almost all of your hit points. You can get killed by hitting rocks, by launching off of ridge lines into trees. You do have to be very careful how you drive this vehicle. So if you want to get this vehicle, and I highly recommend you do because it is so fun if you can afford it, the price for the WIESEL comes in 3 different bundles. You have the primed bundle, which comes with equipment, premium time and boosters for 14,800 gold. Next is the fully loaded bundle, which is 12,800 gold, and that comes with premium time and boosters. And if you want just this tank destroyer on its own, 10,700 gold, which is a 25% savings. That's a very reasonable price for an Era 3 premium tank, especially one with such a good silver bonus. And the silver bonus with this tank destroyer is 65%, and it has fantastic alpha damage on these ATGMs, meaning that if you do a lot of damage, you are going to be raking in that silver. So over here on Excel, I have the stats of the WIESEL here on the left, the Thumper in the middle, and the Type 89 on the right. And it's going to be a little bit difficult at points to compare these tank destroyers due to the fact the Thumper and the Type 89 have guns, whereas the WIESEL only has the tow launcher or the ATGM launcher. But I'll do my best to show you the strengths and the very few weaknesses of the WIESEL. We're going to start by looking at the silver bonus, XP bonus, and commander XP bonus of the WIESEL, and then we're going to get stuck into the raw stats. So the silver bonus, like I have just alluded to, 65%, very nice indeed, and that's the same as the Thumper. And the XP bonus and commander XP bonus is the same as the Thumper, 10%. So all great news for the WIESEL so far. Next, when we start looking at the raw stats of this vehicle, you come to the first kind of downside of this vehicle, and that's the hit points. Pretty low for Era 3 at 2,700, miles off the Thumper's 3,750, and even falling short of the Type 89's 3,200 by 500 hit points. So you have enough hit points to take 3 to 5 rounds, say, in Era 3, but you want to try and use your concealment, your maneuverability, and your tactics on the battlefield to preserve your hit points for as long as possible, and only trade where necessary with your very powerful and very heavy damage dealing ATGMs. Next, we're going to look at the view range, and best in class 590 meters view range on the WIESEL. It beats the Thumper and Type 89 by some way, and when you combine that with the excellent still concealment rating of the WIESEL of 267.97 meters, you can become incredibly sneaky and a very good scout for your team, and you become like a cross between a light tank and a tank destroyer. You are miles better concealed than something like the Thumper or Type 89, and you're more in line with a light tank. Be warned that you won't have the moving concealment like light tanks too, because they do have the same concealment rating when they're moving as when they are still, but you are still incredibly well concealed for a tank destroyer, and you're very hard to spot with the true vision system because you are so small in the WIESEL. Over here I have shown you the moving concealment figure with my commander and equipment setup, and I'll talk you through how good that is in just a little bit. But next we are going to go on to the mobility of the WIESEL and compare it to the other vehicles in this comparison. And don't be alarmed by the incredibly small engine power of the WIESEL. 86 horsepower is insanely small for an Era 3 vehicle, but it just reiterates how small in size the WIESEL is and how lightweight you are. You're miles off the Thumper's 1450 horsepower engine, and even miles off the Type 89 730 horsepower engine. But don't be alarmed, because as you can see, most of the stats coming in this mobility section are highlighted in green, which means it's the best in this comparison, and you are highly mobile indeed with this vehicle. You have a power to weight ratio of 30.21, a top forward speed of 80 kilometers an hour, a top reverse speed of 32 kilometers an hour, and you also have fantastic traverse speeds on your hull of 52 degrees a second, and on your turret, or your gun I should say, of 50 degrees a second, because you don't have a turret, it's just your ATGM launcher on top of the hull of this vehicle. In terms of the power to weight, as you can see, it is miles better than the Thumper and Type 89. It's more like a light tank's power to weight ratio, and you do get across the battlefield very quickly indeed into advantageous positions. Your top forward speed, again, best in class, and you can boost all of this up with mobility equipment, and I highly recommend you take at least one piece of mobility equipment to boost up the top forward speed and top reverse speeds, but also the traverse speed as well, because you don't have a fully traversable gun. It only goes 45 degrees to the left and 45 degrees to the right, and that is something that can catch people out if you're not used to playing vehicles that don't have a fully rotational turret. But I'll try and give you some tips during the gameplay that we will see at, or further towards the end of this video, I should say. But as you can see there, the only real downsides are the actual engine power, but it doesn't impact on the power to weight and the reverse speed, but that can be boosted up if you use the traction system. Next, we're going to look at the guns of the Thumper and Type 89 and the ATGM launcher of the WIESEL 1A1 TOW. It's a little bit hard to compare because obviously guns don't compare well to ATGMs, but I just want to reiterate some things about this TOW launcher, or the ATGM launcher, on the WIESEL. So you have two flavors of ATGM. You have standard ATGMs and you have your premium ATGMs. Both have the same shell velocity, 329 meters a second, which is incredibly slow. But once you get used to guiding ATGMs, it's like any other ATGM in Cold War. It's slow, but you can make it work, especially when you are so well concealed. Your standard penetration for your standard ATGMs is 800mm, which is fantastic, and that deals a whopping 1300 alpha damage. and your premium ATGMs jump up in penetration by 200 to 1000 millimeters, which is best in class and absolutely phenomenal. And it just so happens that your alpha damage goes up as well to 1430 alpha damage. So yeah, a little bit pay to win there, but if you are hitting your ATGMs and making them penetrate, you are still making a massive profit even if you fire full premium ATGM with the WIESEL. So that's something that I will definitely consider doing after I have made this vehicle. I've also included another category to my reviews here of module damage, purely for this review of the WIESEL, and just to show you how much damage you do to things like fuel tanks, to engines, to ammo racks. As you can see here, the Thumper and Type 89 have pretty large guns, 120 and 140 millimeter guns, and their module damage is in the region of 200 to 220, whereas the ATGMs here have a module damage on your standard ATGMs of 650, and that jumps up with the premium ATGMs to 715. And I've done more ammo racks in my one play session with the WIESEL, maybe 30 or so games, than I have in the last 6 months, and that's no exaggeration. This thing sets people on fire. Ammo racks, damages internal modules all the time due to this module damage, and it can be absolutely hilarious when you ammo rack a full health top sort of tier era 3 main battle tank for 4000 hit points, and it really does boost up your XP and your silver earnings. So definitely watch out for that and try and stay away from the ATGMs of the WIESEL if you can help it, if you're playing another tank, especially one with no composite armor or no spaced armor to protect against ATGMs. But as you can see here, you do have that slow shell velocity due to the fact that it is ATGMs, but you can get used to guiding this, especially when you're using the concealment of this vehicle to get up close and personal, ambush a tank, and then run off. And I'll try and give you some ATGM tips during the gameplay. You have fantastic penetration, not quite as good as the 854mm of standard penetration on the Thumper's APF SDS rounds, but 800mm of penetration is more than enough to use when you are getting up behind vehicles and blasting them with an ATGM. And those 1000mm premium ATGMs really do go through even the thickest parts of armor. Just make sure not to shoot at the sort of blockwork armor, which is the composite armor on lots of different vehicles in Era 3. It looks like bricks attached to the tanks and all of the spaced armor. Try and shoot anywhere that is not that, and you are more than likely going to go through with that exceptional penetration value on these ATGMs. Lastly, alpha damage, as you can see, king here in this comparison, 1300 and 1430 respectively. If you're trading 1 for 1 with a vehicle and you're able to get away, you are more than likely always going to come up on top unless you are fighting another WIESEL. Next, we're going to have a look at the aim time or gun handling and ATGM launcher handling, I should say, and the DPM values, as well as the gun depression and elevation values. And then we will get stuck into talking about the Era 3 ATGM and Era 3 concealment values. And then I'll talk to you about my equipment and commander setup. Then we'll finish briefly by talking about the lack of armor and then get stuck into the gameplay. So with ATGMs, it's kind of hard to tell how correct these figures are and how they relate to the ATGMs on vehicles inside the Cold War game mode. It says it has a 1 second aim time and a 0.26 accuracy, which both are phenomenal figures, but it doesn't really feel like it has an aim time at all on these ATGMs or an accuracy. And if you're well adept and you keep practicing with ATGMs, you can more than often hit them, especially when you're using your fantastic concealment. So I haven't really included that in the comparison, but as you can see here, they are the figures of the Thumper and Type 89 for you to have a look at as I waffle on. What I'd like to highlight here though is that there is a lot of red for the rest of this comparison, and that's because there are a few downsides here to make note of. First, the DPM. If you're firing standard ATGMs, 3120 DPM, and that's only of course if you penetrate every single ATGM. Sometimes you will be damaging for half that amount if you don't manage to penetrate, but you're sort of splashing internally. And sometimes you will get your ATGMs absorbed. So definitely that is a DPM if you're penetrating all the time, and it's much more easy to penetrate all the time and be more consistent with a gun, especially one like the Thumper that has fantastic penetration values as well. And as you can see, the DPM on the Thumper and the Type 89 absolutely obliterates the DPM of the WIESEL. And if you're firing solely premium ATGM, your DPM only goes up to 3,432, which is not absolutely horrific, and DPM isn't always king. Sometimes you have that ability to run away, get re-stealthed, come in, ambush another tank, and in longer, more drawn-out battles, you'll still be dealing a lot of damage, but it's definitely something to watch out for. Don't get into one-on-one engagements, one-on-one fights, where you're consistently having to fire at each other because you're just going to get ripped to shreds. Don't try and get in close proximity to main battle tanks because they're going to ram you and take off pretty much all of your hit points. Next, the reload for one ATGM is 25 seconds. I think that's a 2.4 rounds a minute, so definitely a pretty hefty reload. I've got mine down to 21.33 seconds, and you can get it better than that, maybe under 20 seconds, but I've gone more for a concealment build with my commander and equipment setup. As you can see here, that's obviously going to be longer than the guns in this comparison. You carry 24 ATGMs, and due to that pretty long reload, you are not going to really be running out of ATGMs unless you have like a 20,000 plus damage battle. So yeah, don't worry about that figure. You do have a fantastic gun depression value on this launcher of 10 degrees. That's a little bit better than the Thumper and 2 degrees better than the Type 89, which makes this very useful for using very small ridge lines, poking your ATGM launcher over the top, firing an ATGM, then scuttling back behind the ridge line. One thing, or two things I should say to watch out for, are the poor gun elevation values on this gun launcher. If you're ever so slightly downslope and trying to fire upwards, you can get caught out in a lot of different positions on ridgelines because you are so small, and it can be incredibly awkward to get your launcher round on target. So watch out for that. You will see that in the gameplay at the end. And lastly, the yaw limit, or how far the gun turns to the left and right. The WIESEL doesn't have a fully traversable gun. The launcher only goes 45 degrees to the left and 45 degrees to the right, whereas something like the Thumper and Type 89 have fully rotational turrets. So you do have to practice getting into positions with the WIESEL, using ambush tactics, and you do have to practice using ATGMs on the move, whilst also trying to avoid going past your whole lock and completely screwing up your shot. I don't use the whole lock in game, and I'll show you what that is when we get to the gameplay. I like to take it off so that when I swing my reticle round and look at a tank, my tank moves for me. I wait for it to settle for about half a second, then I can start guiding my ATGMs. But that's all of the stats of the WIESEL compared to the other two tank destroyers in this comparison. Let's have a quick look at the ATGMs in Era 3 and see where the WIESEL holds up. And here this is sorted in penetration, and as you can see, the penetration on the premium ATGMs on the WIESEL are joint best with the M3A2 Bradley, and the standard penetration on the standard ATGMs at 800mm is kind of in the middle, but still a very good value and much better than something like the ATGMs on the MBT70. In terms of the damage, let's sort this. If I can find the right section to sort, let's sort the damage from largest to smallest. The WIESEL's 1430 alpha damage is the highest alpha damage you're going to get on an ATGM in Era 3 with those premium ATGMs, and the standard 1300, that is the same as the M3A2 Bradley and towards the top end, so very high alpha damage on these ATGMs. In terms of module damage, let's again sort this from largest to smallest. Sorry about the little pinging noise. Module damage highest again for the WIESEL on those premium ATGMs, and it's towards the top with the standard ATGMs. Much more module damaged than on something like the Makavas or the Magak or MBT70s ATGMs. And as you can see there, the BMP3, very powerful light tank in Era 3, much higher module damage than on that tank. Lastly, let's sort the speed from largest to smallest, and the WIESEL 329 meters a second. It falls a little bit behind the T72B and BU and BMP3, but it's still towards the top end, towards the middle, pretty good shell velocity for ATGM. So I hope that gives you a nice overview. Feel free to take screenshots of this there so you can see how the ATGM stack up in Era 3. Lastly, in terms of the Era 3 tank destroyer and light tank concealment ratings, the WIESEL's steel concealment is the best out of all light tank and tank destroyers in Era 3 at 267.97 meters, meaning that when you are still, you have the best possible steel concealment rating in Era 3, and due to the fact you are such an incredibly small profile tank, this is very, very damaging indeed to the enemy, and you become very powerful. However, if we go to the moving concealment and sort that from smallest to largest, you can see that the WIESEL does drop down to the third from bottom there with 360.97 meters moving concealment. And that's because it is a tank destroyer like the Type 89 and the Thumper, whereas all of these light tanks have the same concealment rating when they are moving and when they are stationary. So watch out for that. When you move, you are going to be losing a lot of your steel concealment rating, and that's something that will catch people out. It feels like a light tank, but it is classified as a tank destroyer, and it doesn't have the same concealment ratings when you are still and when you are moving. So I hope that's given you a good overview of the WIESEL 1A1 TOW. I'll now talk to you about my commander and equipment setup, and I'll show you how that has affected the stats or the base stats of the WIESEL. In terms of equipment, I run advanced concealment, I run the advanced powertrain and traction system, and in terms of commander skills, I run Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Camouflage Expertise, Muffled Shot, and Green Thumb. I could also add in the silent driving, as this isn't a light tank, and that would boost up my concealment even more, and that's probably something I should have taken maybe over something like Green Thumb or Muffled Shot. It would improve my concealment when moving, but this seems to be working out pretty well for me. Some gun handling skills to help the ATGM launcher on the WIESEL, Rapid Loading to help the DPM, and Sixth Sense and Born Leader is a standard on every commander that I run. And in terms of the equipment, advanced concealment, obvious to improve the already fantastic concealment of this vehicle, and I run both pieces of mobility equipment to help that low engine power, boost up the power to weight and the top forward and reverse speeds, and also to boost up the traverse speeds, as it doesn't have a fully traversable gun, so I can quickly spin around, get my launcher on target if people are trying to get around me, and it just means that I'm more maneuverable on the battlefield, and the fact that you can only go 45 degrees to the left and right doesn't become such an issue. So how has that affected the stats of the WIESEL 1A1 TOW? So as you can see, my view range has gone to 615 meters, and my steel concealment rating has dropped to 35 meters. I'm not sure if that is a bug or whether that is the actual figure. Let's say it's the actual figure. That's below the 50 meters proxy detection. So when I'm stationary, people are only going to detect me if I fire, if I move a little bit, or if they get within 50 meters of me, showing you how powerful this concealment is. And you can become an incredible scout with this vehicle and hide in ambush waiting for your opponents. And with that great view range, which is already good base but boosted it a little bit, that's going to make this tank incredibly useful at spotting your opponents. In terms of the moving concealment, 156.71 meters when I'm moving, still very, very nice moving concealment. Of course, you do have the true vision system, but you are so incredibly small, it is very difficult for people to try and find you with the naked eye, and you can boost that up by using silent driving as a choice, I should say, with the commander skills. Next, in terms of mobility, my engine power has gone up from 86 horsepower to 90.3. My power to weight's gone up even more to 31.73, so that's very fast light tank territory. Top forward speed gone up to 92.4 kilometers an hour. That reverse speed, which wasn't the best in this comparison, has now gone up to 36.96, meaning it's pretty damn fast going backwards. And the hull traverse and turret traverse have improved as well. 57.2 degrees a second on the hull and 57.89 degrees a second on the turret. Lastly, aim time down to 0.96, accuracy to 0.22, and more importantly, the reload has dropped to 21.33 seconds, meaning with standard ATGMs, if I'm penetrating 3,653 DPM, and with the premium ATGMs, 4,018 DPM if I'm penetrating every time with those premium ATGMs. Of course, that's my setup. You can of course tweak it. I'm sure I'm going to play around with mine, but that's a pretty good starting point if you are unsure where to go. Quickly talk about the armour of the WIESEL. I'll go to the armour viewer in garage and just tell you, because there is absolutely no armour on this vehicle at all. So the strongest part is the sort of mantle bit that holds the ATGM launcher, and I'm not even sure if that is a hitbox. I'm pretty sure it's not. The actual hull of this vehicle, like the front of the vehicle, is 5mm of armour. Any HE round is going to go through you, and the side armour of this vehicle is 7mm. So it really is the glassiest of glass cannons. You are going to be taking HE damage left, right and centre, and if people ram you, you will lose your 2,700 hit points very, very quickly indeed. But that's it for the stats comparison of the WIESEL 1A1 TOW. Let's now get snuck into the first of 4 gameplays. So we're now into the first of 4 gameplays here in today's video, and we're in the WIESEL TOW and we're on Alamein in a standard battle, and we're going to race into position early doors, try and get somewhere centrally, use the ridge line that is straight in front of us, and try and get some spots on enemy tanks that are making their way into position. And that's how I like to play this tank destroyer from the get-go. Play it a little bit like a tank destroyer on a map with lots of foliage, so bushes and trees. Try and get into a nice little bush, get some vision out for my team, and hopefully get an ambush ATGM off. And on a map like we are here on Alamein, use a ridgeline like we are there to try and get a sneaky ATGM ambush. Unfortunately, the ridgeline stopped my ability to guide the ATGM effectively, and I didn't want to push up a little bit over the ridge and take a multitude of shots, so I let the ATGM fly. We're going to fall back, we're getting some vision on that thumper, and we're going to get some nice assistance damage to start today's battle. I preemptively fire an ATGM there at the thumper, thinking he was going to come over the ridge line. It's a very small chance that I would deal no damage at all, due to the fact the front of the turret of the thumper has composite armor. It would probably absorb ATGMs, but it's always worth trying to loop a shot onto the top of the roofs of different turrets, because that's where it's likely to have thinnest armor and overmatchable plates. So we're going to come a little bit lower, and we're going to get an ambush shot here from underneath on this thumper. We lock him in place there with our ATGM and deal a very nice 1,223 damage, and that's with the standard ATGMs. I carry a handful of standard and mostly premium, because why wouldn't you? Better penetration, better module damage, and better alpha damage. Of course, if you have a terrible game, you might end up not making much or make a tiny little loss, but if you have a good game, you still make a heck of a lot of silver, anywhere from 200 to 600,000 silver, and yeah, a little bit more if you're using boosters. So it's incredibly effective to use those premium ATGMs. If you get comfortable with using them, definitely make sure they work. But we got an ATGM there, sat out in the open. I just took a shot because I've noticed the WIESEL fired. And yeah, we can now chase down this thumper and hopefully get an ATGM into the back of him. I make a mistake there of not really stopping to guide it into the rear of the thumper. We only deal some internal splash damage with that ATGM, and we nudge the thumper and lose a pretty large chunk of our hit points. And that just goes to show how the size of this vehicle really affects impact when you hit things. And I don't only mean tanks, I mean trees, ridgelines, rocks. You can get self-destroyed very easily, so definitely watch how you're driving. Take that little bit extra care if you have the opportunity to do so, because you can lose a substantial amount of hit points just getting into position. We then got a nice ambush shot there, as you just saw, into the rear of that tank, pushing our damage total already to 4,000 damage, and we haven't really done an awful lot in this battle. We've just got a couple of ambush shots off, a little bit of vision, but it is all about making those ATGMs count because of your poor DPM, and you still have cracking damage results. I'm hoping you're getting a nice sense of the mobility of the WIESEL here as we're traversing over this kind of medium to soft terrain, incredibly mobile, and for something that doesn't have a fully traversable gun or ATGM launcher, it's incredibly nimble at turning. It feels very nice, especially when you're using the advanced powertrain and the traction system like I am. We fire an ATGM there on the move into the back of that enemy WIESEL with a premium ATGM and deal a very nice chunk of damage, and then we're going to disengage, run away, get re-stealthed, and then try and pick our next target. And it's all about rinsing and repeating that ambush style gameplay, trying to pop up from unsuspecting locations, sitting in bushes, sitting on ridge lines, waiting for your opportunity, and then using your mobility to get away. And if you do use the mobility pieces of equipment, especially both like I am, then you are able to outrun pretty much every other vehicle inside the era-free Cold War game mode. You just have to be careful that you don't get rammed or hit a tree or hit something that will slow your momentum down, because then you do become a target for enemy tanks. You're seeing we're extending vision out, and we're not even really intending to extend our vision out at this point in the game. It's just the fantastic base view range that this tank has that is extending our vision out. And yeah, it just leads to all-round fantastic combined damage games. We've got 1621 damage to play with here, and we're going to hopefully come around and pick our next target. I was a bit greedy there and didn't go for the kill on the main battle tank to my right. We were going to come up here and try and get an ATGM into one of these tanks with more hit points. We only do a little bit of splash damage there, but we're going to just zoom out of the way, and it doesn't take a very big ridgeline to hide this tank. You can hide behind even the smallest of ridgelines because you are so damn tiny, and some would say you're pretty cute for a tank destroyer. But that ends that first gameplay there, and I'd say that was a pretty mediocre game in terms of the WIESEL 7k direct damage. That's only a second class with 1.4k assistance. We finished second on our team, and the fellow pleb that I was talking about, I believe in the stats, finishes with a fantastic result there in today's game. He finishes in the MVP slot with 12,000 direct damage and 3.5k assistance, putting me to shame and getting 1704 base experience points. But in that game, we finished with a profit, with or without a premium account, and that is with firing some of the premium ATGMs of 445,000 silver without a premium account and 548,000 silver with, and I believe that was with a 1.25 times silver booster, something like that. So that's nearly all base profit. A very, very good game to start off today's video, and a very nice damage total for a 5 minutes and 38 seconds battle. We're now going to head on into the second gameplay. Welcome to the second gameplay of today's video, and we're here on Dezful. We're in a standard battle, and we're just over a minute into this battle. We have come into this location here. The first minute's just me getting into this location. We're trying to get some view range out towards the north of this map and try and spot tanks that like to hide on that bridge, and we're also trying to proximity detect the tank to my right above for my enemies to shoot at in the middle. A lot of our team have sort of just sat back on the one line, which is going to make it very difficult for us to push the tempo in this battle, so we're going to play it a little bit cautiously. We get a little bit of assistance there, but we're going to spin around and see if we can now get some shots or ATGMs down towards the south of the map, and it's just about finding these little windows of opportunity to get ambush shots off and when you have whittled down the enemy enough, you are able to move forward a little bit more and then push the tempo of the battle. You could go really erratic, running around in the middle trying to sort of joust people with your ATGM, and that can be really fun and it can give you really good games, but I'm trying to play it a little bit more sensibly here at the moment. I like to preserve, or reserve I should say, that kind of gameplay for the end parts of the battle when there's less enemies on the enemy team and there's more time for me to sort of free roam and use the concealment of this vehicle to get into advantageous positions. But we're just set up here now next to this bush, and we're going to try and get an ATGM at one of these tanks that are hiding in the back there. Unfortunately, our first one misses. We have loaded the premium ATGMs now for the extra alpha damage, as it's looking like this might be a game that's hard to turn around into a win. We're down by 3 tanks. This thumper's coming over the ridge. I'm going to wait till he's quite far over the ridge before we fire the ATGM. A little bit unlucky there, I thought, not for that ATGM to go up into the front of the bottom plate of the thumper, but we deal a little bit of splash damage there and we're able to disengage, use the great traverse speeds and mobility of the thumper, turn around and try and pick our next target. And in terms of the consumables, which I didn't mention when talking about the commander and equipment setup, I use large med, large repair kit and the enhanced smokescreen to help the concealment rating passively and actively of this vehicle. It's been a little bit of a tricky start to today's battle, but it's going to get a little bit more interesting from now on. We're going to try and defend the base as we are getting capped, and all of our teams seem to want to sit in D1. So we're going to try and be the vision for our team, play that light tank role and see how much damage we can do before either we lose or we manage to turn this one around into a victory. So I'm trying to use the free camera to look using the true vision system at where this tank is in the capture circle. I'm guessing he's behind this little ridge over here. So we come around here, he's looking a different way, and we're going to fire the ATGM on the move. We don't manage to penetrate, but with the premium ATGMs we do a nice lot of splash damage there, over 700 damage. We're going to disengage and then we're going to re-stealth and come in hopefully from an angle that the enemy tank is not expecting us to come in from. In terms of firing ATGMs, especially on the move and especially when you're using a tank like the WIESEL that doesn't have a fully rotational gun launcher, it really is all about keeping your right analog stick on the enemy tank, using your left to move your tank as minimally as possible, and just keeping your right stick in the same spot on the tank and just hoping that your ATGM goes where you want it to. It takes a little bit of practice, but if you practice keeping your right analog stick into the same position whilst moving your left one forwards and only minimally guiding it left and right, you are able to deal some nice damage with ATGMs whilst on the move, and it becomes particularly valuable when there's lots of these WIESELs and light tanks running around in Cold War very quick and you're jousting with enemy tanks. There, the enemy WIESEL tried to take us out with an ATGM. We managed to swerve at the last moment, and that's where it really does come in handy, using the traction system, boosting up that traverse speed to try and jerk your tank to the left and right and avoid fire from ATGMs and from incoming guns that might be sniping at you. And now we're just playing ring around the rosy with these rocks, using the great mobility of this tank. We managed to swing around there with the traverse speed of this tank destroyer. We, on the move, put an ATGM in the front of that MBT-70. I don't believe we penetrated there again. Sometimes you don't have the option to stop and aim for a weak spot. You just have to try and guide and hope for the best. But more often than not, you have to try and sit stationary, guide your ATGM, aim for a spot that doesn't have any spaced or composite armor. And again, for those of you that have skipped towards the gameplay and haven't watched the stats part of today's video, you can usually detect the composite or the explosive reactive armor, I should say. It looks like bricks that have been attached to the tank. Don't fire ATGMs into them, they will just get absorbed. fire ATGMs into flatter parts of tanks that look like they don't have any spaced armour, or even better yet, look up what tanks you come across on a daily basis playing this game and look in the armour viewer, look where the spaced armour is, and then you're going to have good indications of where to fire at tanks and have the best chance of your ATGMs penetrating. It's useful to try and have a guide of weak points of all of the Era 3 tanks, and I might try and compile one for the future, but it's definitely something that you can research yourself. Look in the armour viewer of the main battle tanks, look at the sections of armour that don't have spaced armour on them, and yeah, aim for those weak spots when you can. Sometimes you don't have the time, like I say, but when you do, it does make your ATGMs even more effective. I'm sat still there to try and keep the concealment rating as long as possible, and then we manage to get a shot as that WIESEL gets tracked into position and we take him out of the game. And whilst I was talking about the manoeuvrability and firing ATGMs, we've now made a pretty bad start to the game, or a pretty poor start to the game, into a fairly respectable damage output for the WIESEL. We've got 2.5k assistance and 6k exactly direct. We're only down by 2 tanks, so it's looking like we might be able to turn this one around. I'm going to be the one to go back to base, as we have 2 tank destroyers in D1 that are still in the same position, don't look like they're going to be moving, and I'm going to use the mobility of this tank, or tank destroyer I should say, to try and get back into the base, reset it, and hopefully I manage to then go and help the last remaining couple of tank destroyers on our team. We're now going to come in from an angle I was hoping the enemy weren't expecting me to come in from. Again, using the True Vision system with the free camera, we spot the thumper. His sixth sense might have gone off there as we have spotted him out, and he's gone over to help his teammate out. So we're going to make use of this ridge here, pop up on it. We're going to sit stationary for a bit, wait for our opportunity to get a nice ATGM right into the rear of the thumper. Nice module damage there. We damage his engine. We're going to pop our smoke consumable. Then we're going to reset our stealth and then hopefully come in from a different angle. It's now 2 against 5, so it's looking unlikely, but you never know with a tank like this, with such fantastic concealment, if you're able to pull off some incredible victories from the jaws of defeat there. It's now 1 versus 5, and I'm going to give it my best shot, but yeah, it's one of those ones where you just want to try and get as much out of the end of this game as possible. We've spotted this thumper. It doesn't look like he's noticed us until we start getting close to him. If we had the same still concealment as we do when we are moving, we would have been able to remain undetected, but because we were moving, we got detected, and that is one of the downsides to this being designated as a tank destroyer and not as a light tank. However, we still managed to turn around and guide an ATGM to finish off that thumper, and now we're just trying to avoid taking any kind of fire we can. Hopefully we manage to get our last ATGM loaded and we can get one last ATGM into the enemy in a pretty fast and furious last remaining portion of this battle. First few minutes were pretty slow, but the rest of the game was pretty fun. One enemy WIESEL succumbs to what this tank destroyer succumbs to, and that is self-destruction, going over a ridgeline, hitting a rock, hitting a tree in midair, and completely destroying your tank. But now we're just trying to escape the clutches of the enemy WIESEL. I'm going to try and use a tactic that it can come off, is when someone is chasing you, you can just stop, wait for them to rush forward in front of you, and then fire as they go in front. The only problem with that is that this tank is very bouncy, and due to the fact that it has gun depression of 10 degrees, you can bobble your launcher up and down, and it means you can miss if you don't take the time to sit stationary for a while and guide your ATGM. But for that battle, we finished with a fairly respectable 7.9k direct damage, 2.5k assistance, 4 kills, and a nice profit with or without a premium account of 422,000 silver and 532,000 silver. So that's it for the second gameplay. We're now going to head on into the third gameplay. So we're now into the third gameplay of today's video, and we are back on Dezful. This time we are in an encounter battle. We're over a minute and a half into the battle, and the first minute and a half has consisted of me trying to get some vision out for our team, but also coming into this central location and trying to find the perfect first ambush predatory ATGM. Unfortunately, it hasn't come until this moment. We managed to take out that TCM AGS, get him out of the game. Then we're going to try and move around to find our next target, and this central location is a really nice location to get vision and shots out to all four corners of the map. But as it's an encounter battle, hopefully more towards the encounter capture circle will give us better opportunity to get some more damage out. I nearly flipped and nearly self-destructed there. You have to be so careful when you are in this tank destroyer, and the enemy Wiesel nearly did the same. Fortunately, our Leopard 2A5 takes him out, so we can push further forwards and try and get some vision out. And when there aren't light tanks in the game, or your light tanks aren't doing the spotting job, you are able to go forth and do the scouting for your team in this vehicle, as I have already alluded to. And just by coming here, we're able to spot out all of the tanks that are sitting in E and D1 on the enemy team. And there's a nice ridgeline in front of us, which for most tanks, light tanks, tank destroyers in this game wouldn't be sufficient to hide the hull of them. But with the Wiesel, you're so small, even a ridgeline as small as the one in front of us is able to only expose our gun launcher to the enemy. So I'm going to do a few little rings there, keep the vision up on those tanks, and then we're going to try and find a different location to get some damage off. And it's really hard to get a really meaningful set of gameplay where you play the game perfectly, or you can show the strengths and weaknesses of the tank. Because there are so many Wiesels in the matchmaker at the moment, it's so hard to have what you'd call meta games, or games that you experience on a day-to-day basis of tanks going to certain locations, etc. It's just a complete mismatch at the moment. It's sort of chaos theory in practice, but I hope that you're getting a good indication of the mobility of this tank, the devastating ATGMs, how good the still concealment rating is, and even for a tank destroyer, how good the moving concealment of this vehicle is. You're able to weave, bob dodge in and out of the enemy fire. You're able to come up behind people, get your ATGMs off, reset, and then you can come in again and just, yeah, you have to do that over and over again in the battle, and you should come out with some pretty decent results. And people having extraordinary results in this vehicle. It's extremely popular. I haven't seen a premium tank sell this well as when the Armadillo was introduced, because that thing was so crazily broken when it came into the game. I fear this might be nerfed in the future, but it won't be by an awful lot because it is so powerful. But give it a month or so, give it a couple of months to see how the matchmaker holds with this tank in play, and I'm sure with the introduction of the next Cold War premium in Era 3, the novelty will wear off and people will start playing other tanks. But it's an extremely fun tank destroyer. It gives you that flavour of a tank destroyer with the ATGMs, with the fun of the light tank going around with your mobility. Unfortunately there I managed to flick past because I don't have the hull lock on, and I managed to miss that ATGM. If you don't know what hull lock is, you press left on your D-pad with a tank that doesn't have a fully traversable turret, and it means that when you move your sniper view or your camera past the point at which your gun or your turret can move, your tank will move automatically in that direction. It's set immediately for the hull lock to be on, which means that you aren't able to do that. But I prefer to have it so that when I swing my camera around, my tank swings around for me. It just feels more comfortable for me to play. But yeah, it's something for you to tweak around with and see what you feel more comfortable with. But that's left on the D-pad, and it's the orange icon that you'll see towards the bottom left corner box. But as I've been rambling on, we've managed to pick up some nice assistance just by roaming around, getting vision out on all of the tanks that are here in the centre, and all of the tanks that were situated down the one line. got a couple of ATGMs into various tanks, and now we're going to go for an ATGM into the Thumper. We fire the ATGM slightly higher than the hull so we can push the ATGM down onto the top of the hull, and that usually means you negate a lot of the angling of the armour, but you also miss a lot of the spaced armour. You can do that kind of thing with tanks where you can land the ATGMs like an artillery on top of their turret, on top of their engine decks, and on top of the tank. It just takes some practice. You fire up into the air and you guide it downwards slowly as you guide your ATGM. But that's it for that gameplay there. In the third gameplay, we finish with a victory finally on Dezful. We finish in the MVP slot there, and again that's only a second class mastery for 1384 XP, 2 kills, 4.8k direct damage, 6.2k assistance, and again a profit with or without a premium count, without 438,000 silver and with 543,000 silver. So now I'm going to head on into the fourth and final gameplay of today's video, and then I'll tell you my final thoughts on this fantastic little tank destroyer. So we are now into the fourth and final gameplay of today's video. Don't forget there will be a little Armour montage at the end of today's video for you to see the power of the module damage with these ATGMs. Firstly, in this battle I want to discuss the last kind of thing with guiding ATGMs and talking about ATGMs. In terms of this launcher, whilst the gun depression is pretty damn good and the gun elevation is poor, the gun traverse is very nice, which means you can snap your ATGMs round to the left and to the right up to that limit of 45 degrees. However, the moving the gun up and down is very slow indeed, so to get down to that 10 degrees it takes quite some time compared to guns. The launcher takes some time to move downwards, it takes some time to move upwards, which means that when you stop suddenly, you bob your tank forward, it rocks back and forward, and it can mean you catch your ATGM into the ground or you fire it over your enemy vehicle. That happens especially when you've moved from top speed to stop in and you're trying to shotgun a tank. It can be worth it just taking that half a second extra to make sure your ATGM is fully aimed in and you're using the extent of your gun depression. When you're moving, the only way to negate that is to go into sniper view. When you are moving forward, keep your right analog stick locked onto the weak part that you want to hit on your enemy, and you only move your left and right joystick as minimally as possible to try and avoid your gun, or your launcher in this case, bobbing up and down. Even little mounds or little ridge lines will make this gun go up and down quite significantly because you are such a small vehicle and because you are so lightweight. So it's definitely something to think about, and it can catch you out. But we're just playing a little bit of a hectic game here on Airfield. We're just going ham against these tanks. I'm going to make sure I stop for a second to try and get the ATGM on that WIESEL, but I give hardly any lead at all, which is just an error on my part. I really should hit that shell, but we're just playing really kind of recklessly in a way, and it's why I was saying in the last replay, it's very hard to get meaningful gameplay in these reviews sometimes, especially when a new premium is so popular, because there's so many in the matchmaker. The games don't feel like the games that you've had before. There's no real meta to the gameplay. It's tanks everywhere. It's the same tank on both teams, sometimes even 10 of the same tanks per side, so it's really hard to tell, but I'm just trying to give you a nice flavour of what this tank destroyer is like. You saw there the barrel bob, so I take that half a second extra to make sure we aim that ATGM on that Leopard 2 right into his lower plate, and we deal a nice hefty chunk of damage. And in 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes, we have dealt 6.4k direct damage, got 2.3k assistance. I try and shotgun that enemy WIESEL, but again, I got too close, wasn't able to get the gun down on target. And for tanks that don't have any gun depression, you can just sit directly underneath their gun, and it is quite hilarious Something that's also very fun to do in this tank destroyer is sit in a bush, wait for people to get really close, wait for them to turn away, then just blast them in the back as they realise that you were in front of them the whole time. And here you're just seeing the power of this tank towards the later stages. We have hit points to play with. We're just making fun of these main battle tanks using the mobility and the small profile. You're so hard to hit. We're going to rock backwards and forwards. I don't really care about taking a shot there because you have the alpha damage to obliterate any tank that's on sort of 1000 to 1500 hit points depending on your RNG. And in that very quick game there on Airfield, we nearly got 10k. We got 9.2k direct damage with a nice assistance value of 2.3k assistance, 2 kills, fired a lot of premium ATGM there. We finished with 1500 XP, MVP on the team. We still make a premium, a profit with or without a premium account. Without a premium account, 170,000 silver. With 310,000 silver. I believe that's with no boosters at all, and that's with firing a lot of the premium ATGM. So if you make them count, you still make a heck of a lot of silver. But with all of the sort of serious talk out of the way, this is just an incredibly fun vehicle. I've had a real fun time playing this in my one play session with this vehicle. I highly recommend it for the price if you can afford it. You'll make a lot of silver, you'll have a lot of fun, and it's a great tank to practice those ATGM shots, and it rewards you with that fantastic penetration, alpha damage and module damage. So yeah, I highly recommend this tank. Be warned, it might be balanced at some point in the future because it's so popular and doing so well, but yeah, give it a while and then we'll see if it's actually broken the matchmaker or not. But I hope you've enjoyed today's review. Thank you all so much for your patience and your support whilst the content's been a little bit slower than usual, but hopefully back up to pace soon. And I'm going to leave you with a nice little montage of some ATGMs that I have managed to get in my play session yesterday with the WIESEL. I hope that you enjoy that, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.